Have you ever climbed the ladder of success only to find it leaning against the wrong wall? It is a haunting feeling. You might have the money and the status, yet you feel an aching emptiness inside. Why do our quick fixes and communication hacks fail to heal our broken relationships? Maybe the problem isn't what you are doing, but how you see the world. What if the map you are holding is wrong? Let's explore how to stop hacking at the leaves of your life and finally strike at the root. This audiobook summary of The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen R. Covey challenges the modern obsession with personality hacks and quick fixes. Instead, it advocates for a return to the character ethic, a framework based on timeless principles like integrity and fairness. You will journey through a maturity continuum, moving from dependence to independence and finally to interdependence. By mastering self-control and building trust through empathy and synergy, you can align your life with natural laws. This is a guide to solving personal and professional problems from the inside out. Ready to go deeper? Here's the extended summary of the 7 habits of highly effective people. Many people, despite achieving impressive professional success, find themselves struggling with a deep inner hunger. They may have mastered their careers, yet they face fractured relationships, a lack of personal congruency, or a sense of emptiness that no amount of public recognition can fill. Often when we face these challenges, whether it is a flat marriage, a rebellious child, or a lack of loyalty in the workplace, we reach for quick fixes. We look for a new technique, a communication hack, or a positive mental attitude to patch things up. But these are often just social band-aids that treat the symptoms without addressing the chronic underlying cause. The author illustrates this through a deeply personal experience with his own son. The boy was struggling academically and socially, lagging behind his peers. Initially, the author and his wife tried to fix the situation using positive reinforcement and motivational techniques. They tried to psych him up, but it didn't work. They eventually realized that their efforts were ineffective because their underlying perception of their son was that he was inadequate. Despite their encouraging words, their body language and true feelings communicated, "You aren't capable, so we have to protect you." To help him, they realized they didn't need to change him. They needed to change themselves. They had to shift their own internal lens to see his unique worth and potential. This realization points to a major shift in how society views success. For the first 150 years of American history, success literature focused on the character ethic foundational traits like integrity, humility, fidelity, and courage. But after World War I, the focus shifted to the personality ethic. This modern approach emphasizes public image, behaviors, and skills, essentially how to win friends and influence people. While these skills are valuable, they are secondary. Relying on them without a foundation of character is like trying to reap a harvest without planting the seeds. In a natural system, like a farm, you cannot fake it. You always reap what you sow. To understand how to build this foundation, we must understand the concept of a paradigm. A paradigm is like a map in your head. It is not the territory itself, but a model of how you see the world. If you are trying to find a specific location in Chicago, but you are holding a map of Detroit, no amount of positive thinking or behavioral effort will help you arrive at your destination. You might drive faster or complain less, but you will still be lost. To be effective, you don't just need to change your behavior. You need to ensure you have the right map. We assume we see the world as it is, but in reality, we see the world as we are, or as we have been conditioned to see it. Our values and experiences act as a lens, shaping every interpretation. This is why two people can look at the same situation and see two completely different truths. However, we are not stuck with our current maps. We can experience a paradigm shift, a breakthrough, where we suddenly see things in a new light. Consider the author's experience on a subway in New York. A man sat down with his children, who were yelling and causing a scene. The author, irritated by the disturbance, finally asked the man to control his kids. The man lifted his head, looking dazed, and explained that they had just come from the hospital where the children's mother had died an hour ago. Instantly, the author's irritation vanished, replaced by profound compassion. He didn't have to force himself to be patient. His behavior changed automatically because his paradigm had shifted. This is the power of working on the roots rather than the leaves. To make small changes, work on your behavior. To make quantum leaps, work on your paradigms. This connection between how we see and what we do reveals a deeper truth. Being is seeing. We cannot truly change our paradigms, our mental maps, without also changing our character. The two are inseparable. If we want to see the world differently, we must become different people. But what should we align ourselves with? This brings us to the principle-centered paradigm. While our paradigms are subjective maps, there are objective realities out there. Think of these as the territory itself. The author illustrates this with a famous story about a battleship at sea in heavy weather. The captain spots a light on a collision course and signals the other vessel to change direction. The reply comes back, "Advisable for you to change course." The captain, furious, asserts his rank and demands the other ship move. The final reply chills him, "I am a lighthouse." The captain's map was wrong. The reality, the lighthouse, was immovable. Principles are like that lighthouse. They are natural laws, as real and unchanging as gravity. It is important to distinguish principles from values. A group of thieves might share values, but they violate fundamental principles. Principles are self-evident truths like fairness, integrity, honesty, and human dignity. We cannot break these laws. We can only break ourselves against them. Aligning our lives with these principles is not a quick fix. It is a process of natural growth. In our modern world, we are often sold the personality ethic, the idea that we can use techniques and shortcuts to achieve quality of life without doing the deep work. But nature cannot be tricked. You must crawl before you can walk. If you try to skip steps in character development, you will only find frustration. The author shares a personal failure to illustrate this. He once tried to force his young daughter to share her new toys during a birthday party. He tried reasoning, then bribery, and finally threats. When he physically took the toy and gave it to the other child, he thought he had solved the problem. He hadn't. He had simply borrowed strength from his size and authority. By forcing her to share before she truly felt a sense of possession, he stunted her growth. True sharing comes from a feeling of abundance, and you must possess something before you can give it away. This experience reinforces a critical insight. Often, the way we see the problem is the problem. If we look outside ourselves for the cause of our struggles, blaming others, our boss, or our circumstances, we trap ourselves in a victim mindset. We assume the problem is out there. The solution, however, lies in an inside-out approach. As Albert Einstein observed, the significant problems we face cannot be solved at the same level of thinking we were at when we created them. To move to this new level of thinking, we must build new habits. But what is a habit? It is the intersection of three things: knowledge, skill, and desire. Knowledge is the theoretical paradigm, knowing what to do and why. Skill is the how, and desire is the motivation, the want to do. To create lasting change, we must work on all three dimensions. Breaking old habits requires tremendous effort, much like a rocket breaking free of gravity. But once we do, we enter a new dimension of freedom and effectiveness. Once we commit to this effort, the 7 habits guide us along a specific path of growth known as the Maturity Continuum. This continuum moves us from dependence to independence, and finally, to interdependence. Dependence is the paradigm of you. You take care of me. You are responsible for my results. It is the state of the infant. As we grow, we move toward independence, the paradigm of I can do it. I am responsible. This is a major achievement, yet it is not the ultimate goal of effective living. Current society often overemphasizes independence, treating it as the highest peak of development. We often confuse it with simply abandoning responsibility. However, life is inherently interdependent. To try and navigate a complex world with only independent thinking is like trying to play a tennis match with a golf club. The tool does not fit the reality. Interdependence is the paradigm of we. We can do it. We can cooperate. We can combine our talents to create something greater. Crucially, you cannot be interdependent until you are first independent. You cannot share yourself with others if you do not first own yourself. Therefore, the first 3 habits focus on private victories, or self-mastery, moving us from dependence to independence. Only then can we move to the public victories of habits 4, 5, and 6, which build teamwork and communication. Underlying all these habits is a fundamental definition of effectiveness, best illustrated by Aesop's fable of the goose and the golden egg. In the story, a poor farmer discovers his goose lays a glittering golden egg. At first, he is delighted, but soon he becomes impatient and greedy. He decides to kill the goose to get all the eggs at once, only to find the goose empty inside. He has destroyed the source of his wealth. This fable illustrates the PPC balance. P stands for production, the golden eggs, or the desired results. PC stands for production capability, the goose, or the asset that produces the results. True effectiveness is not just about producing results today. It is about maintaining the balance between production and the capacity to produce in the future. We see this principle at work everywhere. If you focus only on P, mowing the lawn constantly without maintaining the mower, the machine eventually breaks down. The principle is even more vital with human assets. In a marriage or a friendship, if you focus only on getting what you want, the golden egg, without investing in the relationship itself, the bond deteriorates. You might get your way in the short term, but you lose the trust and loyalty that make future cooperation possible. Consider a business manager who drives employees relentlessly to boost immediate numbers. They might get promoted for high production, but they leave behind a sick goose, a burnt-out team and broken machinery for their successor to fix. Conversely, treating employees with the same respect you want them to show your best customers builds a reservoir of loyalty and creativity. Balancing P and PC is a judgment call, but it is the very essence of effectiveness. It applies to everything from financial assets to the delicate trust between a parent and a child. For example, taking time to engage in an activity a child loves, even if it isn't your preference, is a deposit into the PC of that relationship, yielding the golden eggs of open communication and mutual respect later on. As you proceed through these habits, try to shift your paradigm from that of a learner to that of a teacher. Read with the intent to share or discuss the material with someone else within 48 hours. This simple shift in mindset will deepen your understanding, expand your perspective, and help you internalize these principles not just as intellectual concepts, but as tools for living. This journey of personal change is an internal process. As the writer Marilyn Ferguson observed, the, quote, gate of change is locked on the inside. No one can force another person to open it. By embracing the 7 habits, you initiate a process of evolutionary growth. The first 3 habits constitute a private victory, focusing on self-mastery. They help you understand your deepest values and unique capabilities, fostering an inner security that allows you to define yourself from within, rather than relying on the opinions of others. Paradoxically, the less you worry about what others think of you, the more you are able to genuinely care about them. This internal stability paves the way for the public victory, the next 3 habits, which are designed to heal and strengthen your relationships. Finally, the 7th habit wraps around the others, providing constant renewal. The foundation of this growth begins with habit 1, be proactive. This habit centers on the principle of personal vision and relies on a uniquely human capacity called self-awareness. Unlike animals, which act primarily on instinct, we have the ability to stand apart from our own minds and examine the way we think. Without this capacity, we are vulnerable to the social mirror, the disjointed and often distorted reflection of ourselves we see in the opinions and perceptions of the people around us. If we rely solely on this social mirror, we may fall into the trap of believing that we are determined entirely by outside forces. There are 3 common maps of determinism that society uses to explain human behavior. First is genetic determinism, which suggests your traits, like a bad temper, are inherited from your grandparents. Second is psychic determinism, which claims your character was shaped unchangeably by your parents and your upbringing. Third is environmental determinism, which blames your boss, your spouse, or the economy for your current situation. All 3 theories are based on a stimulus-response model. Something happens, and you are programmed to react in a specific way. However, this view ignores a fundamental truth about human nature, famously illuminated by Viktor Frankl. A psychiatrist imprisoned in the Nazi death camps, Frankl endured unimaginable suffering and the loss of his family. Yet, in the midst of that horror, he discovered what he called the last of the human freedoms. His captors could control his environment and his body, but they could not control his internal response. He realized that between the stimulus, what happens to you, and the response, what you do about it, there is a space. In that space lies our freedom and power to choose. This freedom is supported by 4 unique human endowments: self-awareness, the ability to examine our thoughts; imagination, the ability to create beyond our present reality; conscience, a deep inner awareness of right and wrong; and independent will, the power to act based on self-awareness rather than external influence. This brings us to the core definition of proactivity. It is not simply a matter of taking initiative. It is about accepting responsibility, the ability to choose your response. Highly proactive people recognize that their behavior is a function of their decisions, not their conditions. While reactive people are driven by feelings and the weather of their environment, proactive people carry their own weather with them. They subordinate their impulses to carefully chosen values. As Eleanor Roosevelt said, "No one can hurt you without your consent." And as Gandhi added, "They cannot take away our self-respect if we do not give it to them." Ultimately, what happens to us is far less important than how we respond to it. Difficult experiences can become crucibles that forge our character, developing the internal strength to handle adversity and inspire others. By recognizing that we are responsible for our own lives, we move from being acted upon to acting, unlocking the potential to rewrite our own scripts. Taking initiative does not mean being pushy, obnoxious, or aggressive. It means recognizing our responsibility to make things happen. Many people wait for something to occur or for someone to take care of them. But those who end up with the good jobs, the strong relationships, and the effective lives are the ones who exercise resourcefulness and initiative. They do not simply wait for problems to be solved. They become the solution. Our language is a faithful indicator of the degree to which we see ourselves as proactive people. The language of reactive people absolves them of responsibility. Phrases like, "That's just the way I am," "He makes me so mad," or "I have to do this," come from a paradigm of determinism. They transfer power to external forces. In contrast, proactive language says, "I can choose a different approach. I control my own feelings, and I will." When we use reactive language, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. We become reinforced in the belief that we are not in control. Consider the common complaint that love has faded in a relationship. A reactive person views love as a feeling, something that happens to them. If the feeling is gone, they believe the love is dead. A proactive person, however, understands that love is a verb. Love is something you do. The sacrifices you make, the listening you offer, and the selflessness you demonstrate. The feeling of love is actually the fruit of love, the verb. By subordinating feelings to values and choosing to act lovingly, we can recapture the feeling. To better understand where we focus our time and energy, visualize a circle of concern. This circle contains everything that concerns us: our health, our children, the economy, or the threat of war. Inside that circle is a smaller circle of influence, containing the things we can actually do something about. Proactive people focus their efforts in the circle of influence. They work on the things they can change: their habits, their attitude, and their skills. By doing so, their positive energy enlarges their circle of influence. Reactive people, on the other hand, focus on the circle of concern, things over which they have no control. They focus on the weaknesses of other people, the problems in the environment, and circumstances they cannot change. This focus results in blaming and accusing, causing their circle of influence to shrink. You can distinguish these two focuses by listening for haves and bes. The circle of concern is filled with the haves: "If I only had a boss who wasn't a dictator," or "If I had more time." The circle of influence is filled with the bes: "I can be more patient," "I can be wise," or "I can be loving." The proactive approach is an inside-out paradigm. It says that if I want this situation to change, I must change myself first. While we are free to choose our actions, we are not free to choose the consequences of those actions. Consequences are governed by natural law. When we pick up one end of a stick, we pick up the other. If we make a mistake, the proactive response is to acknowledge it instantly. correct it, and learn from it. To deny a mistake or try to justify it is to empower it. Ultimately, our ability to make and keep commitments to ourselves is the essence of developing the basic habits of effectiveness. The author challenges us to a 30-day test. For 1 month, work only in your circle of influence. Make small commitments and keep them. Be a light, not a judge. Be a model, not a critic. By focusing on what we can be rather than what we wish we had, we gradually expand our freedom and our influence. Once we accept the responsibility of proactivity, we are ready to define our direction. Habit 2, begin with the end in mind, is the principle of personal leadership. To understand this, the author invites us to participate in a profound visualization exercise. Imagine attending a funeral 3 years from today. As you walk to the casket and look inside, you come face to face with yourself. This is your funeral. As you sit down and listen to the speakers, family, friends, colleagues, and community members, what would you want them to say about you? What character traits would you want them to describe? What contributions and achievements would you want to be remembered for? This exercise forces us to connect with our internal guidance system and our deepest values. By keeping the end clearly in mind, we can ensure that whatever we do on any given day does not violate the criteria we have defined as supremely important. It prevents us from falling into the activity trap, the busyness of life where we work harder and harder to climb the ladder of success, only to discover it is leaning against the wrong wall. It is possible to be busy without being effective. True effectiveness means knowing your destination so that every step you take is in the right direction. The underlying principle of this habit is that all things are created twice. There is a mental or first creation and a physical or second creation. Think of constructing a home. You create it in every detail on the drafting board before you ever hammer a nail. If you do not make that first creation conscious and deliberate, you empower other people and external circumstances to shape your life by default. You end up living out scripts handed to you by family, society, or past conditioning. This distinction highlights the difference between leadership and management. Leadership is the first creation. Management is the second. Management focuses on how to best accomplish certain things. It is about efficiency, or doing things right. Leadership focuses on what we want to accomplish. It is about effectiveness, or doing the right things. The author uses the analogy of a group of producers cutting their way through a jungle with machetes. The managers are there, sharpening the machetes and setting up work schedules to ensure the undergrowth is cleared efficiently. But the leader is the one who climbs the tallest tree, surveys the entire situation, and yells, "Wrong jungle!" In a rapidly changing world, efficiency is irrelevant if we are headed in the wrong direction. To take charge of our first creation, we must re-script ourselves. We can use our self-awareness and imagination to identify ineffective scripts we have inherited and replace them with ones that align with our values. A powerful example of this was Anwar Sadat, the former president of Egypt. Despite being scripted with a deep hatred for Israel, he used his time in prison to vacate his own mind and re-script his paradigms. He realized that real success is success with self. This internal shift allowed him to eventually lead a historic peace initiative, proving that we can write our own scripts rather than being driven by the past. The most effective way to begin with the end in mind is to develop a personal mission statement. This acts as a personal constitution, a changeless core in the midst of a changing world. It focuses on what you want to be and do, and on the values upon which being and doing are based. Writing such a statement requires us to examine the center of our lives. Whatever is at the center becomes the source of our security, guidance, wisdom, and power. These 4 factors are interdependent. Security represents your sense of worth. Guidance is your source of direction. Wisdom is your perspective on life, and power is your capacity to act. Many people center their lives on things that cannot sustain them, such as a spouse, work, or money. For instance, if you are spouse-centered, your emotional stability depends entirely on your partner's moods and behavior, leaving you vulnerable and reactive. True effectiveness requires a center based on correct principles, which do not change and cannot be destroyed. Consider family-centeredness. While this may seem like a noble foundation, Deriving your entire sense of security from family relationships can ironically undermine them. If your worth is tied to family tradition or reputation, you become vulnerable to any change or conflict. Parents who are family-centered may prioritize being popular with their children over disciplining them, or they may offer love only conditionally, reacting emotionally to behavior rather than fostering long-term growth. Similarly, money-centeredness creates a life of anxiety. While economic stability is important, making money your center means your personal worth fluctuates with your net worth. You become defensive and fearful of economic changes, and your decisions are guided solely by profit rather than human needs. Work-centered individuals face a parallel trap. They derive their identity entirely from their profession. If they lose the ability to work, they lose their sense of self. Others center their lives on possessions, seeking security in material goods, or intangible status symbols like fame. Because these can be lost, stolen, or devalued, a possession-centered life is plagued by a constant fear of loss and a need to compare oneself to others. Pleasure-centeredness offers a different kind of emptiness. The pursuit of the next high often leads to narcissism, bored distraction, and an unfulfilled heart. We also see friend-centeredness, where self-worth depends entirely on the opinions of peers, and its inverse, enemy-centeredness. Though it sounds strange, many people center their lives on an enemy or a rival. When you obsess over someone who has treated you unfairly, you become reactive, letting their behavior dictate your emotional state and decisions. Even church-centeredness can be misleading if it focuses on the social image or the organization, rather than living by the principles the faith teaches. Finally, self-centeredness, perhaps the most common of all, leaves a person stagnant, with little capacity to serve or grow. Most people do not function from a single center but fluctuate between them. You might be work-centered on Monday, family-centered on the weekend, and enemy-centered when a conflict arises. This creates a roller coaster existence, lacking consistent direction or wisdom. The only center that provides permanent power and security is a principle-centered one. By centering your life on correct principles, fundamental, unchanging truths, you build on a foundation that does not shift. Principles are not people. They do not have moods, and they do not die. When your security comes from these changeless laws, you are not tossed about by circumstances. Your wisdom comes from a correct map of reality, and your power comes from self-awareness rather than the reactions of others. To understand the profound difference this makes, imagine a specific scenario. You have tickets to a concert with your spouse tonight, a date you've been planning for weeks. At 4 p.m., your boss asks you to stay late to finish an important project. Your response depends entirely on your center. If you are spouse-centered, you might refuse the boss out of fear of offending your partner, or go to work while feeling resentful and guilty. If you are money-centered, you stay and work, thinking only of the overtime pay. If you are work-centered, you view the request as a golden opportunity for advancement and cancel the date without hesitation. If you are pleasure-centered, you go to the concert simply to avoid the pain of working. If you are enemy-centered, you might stay late just to outshine a coworker you dislike. However, if you are principle-centered, you pause. You stand apart from the immediate emotion of the situation. You are not driven by the fear of your boss or the guilt of your spouse. You assess the situation based on your values, weighing the needs of the project, your commitment to your family, and the long-term consequences. You might choose to stay, or you might choose to go, but the decision is a conscious, proactive choice. You act rather than being acted upon, and you do so with peace of mind, knowing your choice aligns with your deepest values. This state of being, where you act rather than being acted upon, stems from a solid, unchanging core. When your center is built on correct principles, you possess a reliable source of security, guidance, wisdom, and power. You are no longer dependent on the moods of others or the shifting circumstances of your environment. Instead, you view the world through a clear, steady lens. The most effective way to align your life with these principles is to develop a personal mission statement. Think of this as a personal constitution. It is the standard against which you evaluate every decision and emotion. If we accept the idea that we are the programmers of our own lives, the mission statement is the program we write. However, Writing this program isn't a casual afternoon task. It requires deep introspection. As Viktor Frankl observed, we detect our mission rather than invent it. We each have a specific vocation that demands our unique contribution. Creating this statement requires us to shift how we use our minds. Our culture often favors the left hemisphere of the brain, the side responsible for logic, analysis, and words. But to envision a holistic future, we must tap into the right hemisphere, the home of intuition, creativity, and synthesis. This is where first creation happens. Before you can live a certain way, you must be able to see it. World-class athletes and peak performers understand this well. Research shows that they are compulsive visualizers. They see, feel, and experience their performance in their minds before they ever step onto the field. You can apply this same principle to your character. Through visualization and affirmation, you can rewrite your internal script. A good affirmation is personal, positive, and set in the present tense. For example, instead of hoping you won't get angry, you might affirm, "It is deeply satisfying that I respond with wisdom and self-control when faced with a crisis." By vividly imagining this behavior, you create an internal comfort zone that guides your actual actions when the pressure is on. Once your right brain has visualized the big picture, your left brain helps you organize it into specific roles. You are not just a professional. You might also be a parent, a spouse, or a community member. A balanced mission statement acknowledges all these roles, ensuring that success in one area doesn't come at the expense of another. This principle of beginning with the end in mind extends beyond the individual. It is equally transformative for families and organizations. For a family, a mission statement acts as a shared constitution, providing a common set of values that binds the members together. But there is a critical rule here: no involvement, no commitment. You cannot simply hand a mission statement to your family or your employees and expect them to follow it. Consider the example of a hotel chain dedicated to, quote, uncompromising personalized service. This wasn't a slogan invented in a boardroom. It was developed with the input of every employee, from desk clerks to housekeepers. Because they helped write it, they owned it. It became the hub for every decision, empowering bellboys and window cleaners to solve guest problems autonomously. Similarly, IBM's core belief in the dignity of the individual wasn't just ink on paper. It was a shared culture that once led the company to fly a sick employee home by private jet for treatment. When the mission comes from within, it creates a unity in power that top-down mandates can never achieve. This principle brings us to a hard truth. Without involvement, there is no commitment. You cannot force people to care about a goal they had no hand in creating. While a new employee might accept a directive, a mature individual needs to feel ownership. Creating a shared vision takes time, patience, and empathy, but the result is a self-governing team that doesn't need constant supervision because they are driven by an internal compass. With that foundation laid, the mental creation of habit 2, we arrive at habit 3, put first things first. If habit 2 is the blueprint, habit 3 is the construction site. It is the physical creation, the moment-by-moment discipline of making that vision a reality. This is where we distinguish between leadership and management. Leadership is a right-brain activity. It asks, what are the ultimate things? Management is a left-brain activity. It analyzes, sequences, and executes. The maxim to remember is simple: manage from the left, lead from the right. Effective management relies on your independent will, the power to make decisions and act on them rather than being acted upon. It is the ability to say, "I will do this," and then follow through, regardless of mood or circumstance. But how do we organize our lives to support this? Traditional time management often focuses on efficiency, checklists, calendars, and prioritizing daily tasks. While useful, these tools can become rigid, often clashing with the human need for spontaneity and relationships. We need a fourth generation of thinking, one that shifts from managing time to managing ourselves. To understand this, visualize a matrix divided into 4 quadrants based on 2 factors: urgency and importance. Urgent means it requires immediate attention. It's the ringing phone. It acts on you. Important, on the other hand, has to do with results. It contributes to your mission, your values, and your high-priority goals. Quadrant I contains things that are both urgent and important: crises, deadline-driven projects, and pressing problems. If you live here, you are a crisis manager, constantly beaten down by stress and burnout. Quadrant 3 is urgent but not important. These are interruptions, some meetings or other people's priorities that masquerade as your own. Many people spend their lives here, thinking they are in Quadrant 1, reacting to things that are urgent to others but matter very little to their own life mission. Quadrant IV is neither urgent nor important, trivial busywork and time-wasting escapes. This is where people go to hide from the pressures of Quadrant 1. The key to effectiveness lies in Quadrant 2, activities that are important but not urgent. This is the zone of prevention, relationship building, planning, and personal growth. Because these tasks are not urgent, they do not press on you. You must act on them. Effective people feed opportunities and starve problems by living in Quadrant 2. They shrink the crises of Quadrant 1 by proactively preventing them before they ever become emergencies. Finding the time for this requires the courage to say no. You cannot prioritize everything. To say yes to important Quadrant 2 activities, you must learn to say no to the urgent but unimportant demands of Quadrant 3. This strength doesn't come from willpower alone. It comes from having a burning yes inside you, a clear sense of purpose defined by your mission. The enemy of the best is often the good. And without a principle-centered center, it is nearly impossible to resist the urgent call of the unimportant. To support this center, we need to look at the tools we use. Time management has evolved in waves. The first generation was just notes and checklists, purely reactive. The second brought calendars and scheduling, looking ahead but still rigid. The third generation, which is where many people are today, added prioritization and daily planning. While helpful, this third generation often focuses too much on efficiency and daily crises, missing the forest for the trees. It can make us feel guilty when relationships interrupt our schedules, leading us to view people as distractions rather than priorities. We need a fourth generation of management, one that focuses on leading your life, not just managing time. The core of this approach is shifting your focus from daily planning to weekly organizing. The day is too short to see the bigger picture, but the week provides a natural rhythm of balance and context. The goal is not to prioritize what is on your schedule, but to schedule your priorities. This process involves 4 specific steps. First, identify your key roles, perhaps as an individual, a parent, a manager, or a community member. Second, select 1 or 2 important goals for each role, specifically those Quadrant 2 activities that will make a long-term difference. Third, schedule these goals into your week before anything else fills the space. Finally, use your daily planning simply to adapt, navigating the unexpected with your priorities already anchored. This approach highlights a critical distinction. You can be efficient with things, but you must be effective with people. You cannot schedule a meaningful conversation or a relationship breakthrough into a 10-minute slot. Attempting to be efficient with people usually results in conflict. Efficiency is for logistics. Effectiveness is for relationships. Once you master self-management, you can increase your leverage through delegation. There are 2 types. The first is go-for delegation, where you tell someone, go for this, go for that, do it this way. This is essentially micromanagement. You are still doing the thinking, and you remain the bottleneck. The far superior method is stewardship delegation. Here, you focus on results, not methods. You give the person a clear target and the freedom to choose how to hit it. Stewardship delegation requires clear communication in 5 areas: desired results, guidelines, resources, accountability, and consequences. A vivid example of this is a father teaching his 7-year-old son to take care of the yard. He didn't give orders, he gave a mission: green and clean. He walked the yard with his son, showing him exactly what that looked like, and established that the son was the boss of the job. When the yard initially got messy, the father didn't revert to scolding or doing it himself, which would have been go-for management. He waited, then asked, "Is there anything I can do to help?" By respecting the stewardship, the son eventually took ownership, driven by his own internal commitment rather than external pressure. He kept the yard cleaner than his father ever had. This is the power of trusting others with results rather than just tasks. It takes more time up front, but it builds capacity and frees you to focus on your own highest priorities. This story illustrates a fundamental truth. Trust is the highest form of human motivation. It brings out the very best in people. While stewardship delegation takes time and patience, especially with those who are less mature, it fosters self-management. It shifts the dynamic so that the individual becomes their own boss, driven by a commitment to results rather than fear of a hovering supervisor. This approach allows you to focus on effectiveness rather than mere efficiency, organizing your life around your deepest priorities. This concept of effective interaction serves as a gateway to a broader level of success, the public victory. However, there is a critical warning here. You cannot build effective relationships, interdependence, without a foundation of true independence. There are no shortcuts. You simply have to travel the road of self-mastery first. If you attempt to use quick-fix techniques to build relationships while your own character is flawed or dependent, people will eventually sense the insincerity. As the saying goes, you cannot talk your way out of problems you behave yourself into. Real self-respect and the capacity for strong relationships stem from the self-control cultivated in the first three habits. To navigate the complex world of human relationships, it helps to use a powerful metaphor: the emotional bank account. This represents the amount of trust that has been built up in a relationship. Just like a financial account, you make deposits and withdrawals. When you treat someone with kindness, honesty, and courtesy, or when you keep a commitment, you make a deposit. Your reserve of trust grows. When trust is high, communication is easy, instant, and effective. You can even make mistakes, and that reserve will cover you. However, if you are disrespectful, break promises, or ignore the other person, you make withdrawals. Eventually, the account becomes overdrawn. When the trust level is low, communication becomes guarded and difficult. You find yourself walking on eggshells, measuring every word. To reverse this, you must stop the withdrawals and begin making consistent, genuine deposits. There are 6 major ways to make these deposits, but the first and most important is understanding the individual. This is the key to all the others, because what constitutes a deposit for you might not be a deposit for someone else. If you try to do something nice for another person, but it doesn't align with their deep interests or needs, they might actually perceive it as a withdrawal. To make a true deposit, what is important to them must become as important to you as the other person is to you. It requires listening and empathy to understand what actually values the other person. Next is attending to the little things. In relationships, the little things are the big things. A small kindness or a warm smile goes a long way, but a small discourtesy or a moment of disrespect can leave a deep scar. Even within the toughest exterior, people have tender feelings. Closely related to this is keeping commitments. Breaking a promise is a massive withdrawal that destroys trust. If you cultivate a reputation for keeping your word, you build a bridge of trust that can carry the weight of difficult conversations later. If you are forced to break a promise by unavoidable circumstances, you must have the character to explain the situation fully and ask to be released from the obligation. Finally, we must look at clarifying expectations. Unclear expectations around roles and goals are the root of almost all relationship difficulties. We often assume the other person knows what we want, but when those hidden expectations aren't met, we feel disappointed and trust erodes. It takes courage to put everything on the table up front, but doing so prevents the painful withdrawals that come from misunderstanding and conflicting assumptions. It requires courage to face these potential differences at the start, but the investment pays off by preventing the personality clashes and communication breakdowns that inevitably follow ambiguous agreements. Next, we must consider personal integrity. Integrity goes beyond simple honesty. While honesty is conforming your words to reality, integrity is conforming reality to your words, keeping promises and fulfilling expectations. A vital part of integrity is being loyal to those who are not present. When you defend the absent, you build massive trust with those who are present. If you gossip or criticize someone behind their back, the person listening instinctively knows you would do the same to them. Duplicity might seem like a way to bond socially, but it ultimately destroys the foundation of trust. Of course, no matter how much integrity we strive for, We will make mistakes. This leads to the next deposit, apologizing sincerely when you make a withdrawal. A genuine apology, saying, "I was wrong," or "I showed you no respect," requires great strength of character. People with little internal security cannot do this. They feel too vulnerable. They rationalize their behavior to protect their ego. But a sincere apology is a deposit. However, be warned. Repeated apologies without a change in behavior are perceived as insincere and eventually drain the account further. People can forgive mistakes of judgment, but they rarely forgive mistakes of the heart or ill intention. The final and most powerful deposit is showing unconditional love. When we love others without strings attached, we affirm their worth. This gives them the security to grow and cooperate. Conditional love, on the other hand, forces people into a defensive posture. They spend their energy rebelling or proving themselves rather than listening to their own conscience. By giving love unconditionally, you untie these emotional knots and empower the other person to act with integrity. Once you have built a high balance in these emotional bank accounts, you are ready to move from the private victory to the public victory. This brings us to habit 4, think win/win. This is not a technique or a quick fix. It is a philosophy of human interaction. It is based on the paradigm that there is plenty for everyone, that one person's success is not achieved at the expense or exclusion of the success of others. Most of us, however, are scripted in the win/lose mentality. From academic grading curves to competitive sports, we are taught that life is a zero-sum game. For me to win, you must lose. In an interdependent reality, this is disastrous. If I win and you lose, I have lost your commitment and loyalty, so in the long run we both lose. The alternative, lose/win, is no better. This is the position of capitulation, where you have no standards and no demands. Lose/win, people seek popularity and acceptance, often burying their true feelings to avoid conflict. But these suppressed emotions do not die. They fester and eventually emerge as cynicism or disproportionate rage. Both win/lose and lose/win are weak positions based on personal insecurity. When two win-lose people clash, two determined, stubborn, ego-invested individuals, the result is almost always lose-lose. Both parties become vindictive, wanting to get back at the other more than they want to succeed themselves. True effectiveness requires a different mindset entirely, a commitment to mutual benefit. To be clear, there is no single approach that is universally best for every single moment of existence. The right strategy depends on the reality of the situation. If you are playing a game of football, win/lose is appropriate. You want to beat the other team. If you are in a physical emergency, a simple win mentality, where you focus solely on your own survival without wishing harm on others, is necessary. However, most of life is not a competition or a solo sprint. It is an interdependent reality. In your marriage, your family, and your business relationships, if you win and the other person loses, you have actually lost. You may get your way in the short term, but you damage the relationship and the trust required for future cooperation. Therefore, in an interdependent reality, win/win is the only viable alternative. There is, however, a liberating variation of this principle, win/win or no deal. This approach means that if we cannot find a solution that benefits us both, we agree to disagree agreeably and we make no deal. This provides immense emotional freedom. It removes the pressure to manipulate or push for a result that leaves one party resentful. It is far better to realize upfront that our values or goals are incompatible than to force a partnership that leads to disillusionment later. By having the no-deal option in your back pocket, you can negotiate honestly, knowing that you are not trapped. Achieving this level of mutual benefit is not a matter of learning a few negotiation tactics or personality techniques. It requires a fundamental foundation of character. You cannot sustain a win/win outcome if you do not possess the underlying traits to support it. This character foundation rests on 3 pillars: integrity, maturity, and the abundance mentality. Integrity is the value we place on ourselves. If we cannot keep commitments to ourselves and others, there is no trust, and without trust, win/win is just a facade. But the second pillar, maturity, is often the most misunderstood. We typically think of maturity as simply being grown up. But in this context, maturity is the balance between courage and consideration. If you have high courage but low consideration, you will dominate others. You have a win-slash-lose mindset. You are strong, but you lack empathy. Conversely, if you have high consideration but low courage, you will be eager to please and afraid of conflict. You fall into lose-slash-win. You have empathy, but you lack the strength to voice your own convictions. True emotional maturity is the ability to express your own feelings and convictions with courage, while simultaneously balancing that with consideration for the thoughts and feelings of others. It is the ability to be both tough and nice. The third character trait is the abundance mentality. This is the paradigm that there is plenty out there for everybody. It contrasts sharply with the scarcity mentality, which views life as a finite pie. If someone else gets a big slice, that means less for you. People with a scarcity mentality have a hard time sharing recognition, credit, or profit. They are threatened by the success of others. The abundance mentality, on the other hand, flows from a deep inner sense of personal worth and security. It recognizes that life is not a zero-sum game, and that genuine cooperation can create a third alternative that is better than what either party could have achieved alone. When you have this character foundation, you can build high trust relationships. We call this having a high emotional bank account. When trust is high, communication becomes easy and instant. You don't need to worry about legalistic language or guarding your words, because the intent is clear. This trust allows you to move from vertical supervision, where one person controls another, to horizontal partnership. This shift leads to the creation of win-slash-win agreements. These are not just contracts, they are instruments of self-supervision. Instead of hovering over someone, you establish a clear understanding up front. A true win-slash-win agreement explicitly defines 5 elements: the desired results, the guidelines or parameters, the resources available, the accountability standards, and the consequences of the evaluation. When these are clear, people can judge themselves, fostering dignity and true independence within the relationship. Consider how this plays out in a professional setting. The author describes a management training program at a large banking institution that was originally designed to take 6 months. The program was method-focused, requiring trainees to sit in various departments and watch how things were done. But when the bank shifted to a win-win agreement approach, defining specific results, criteria, and guidelines up front, the trainees were unleashed. They were no longer passive observers. They became active learners driven by clear objectives. The result was astonishing. Trainees completed the 6-month curriculum in just 3.5 weeks, and with higher competency than before. When people understand the target and are trusted to hit it, their potential expands. This approach changes the role of a manager. You are no longer a hovering supervisor. You become a resource and a facilitator. Management philosopher Peter Drucker captured this spirit with the concept of a manager's letter. In this practice, an employee writes a letter to their manager defining their own performance expectations and the support they need to achieve them. Once agreed upon, this document becomes the charter for self-government. Of course, for this to work, the consequences of performance must be clear. In a win-slash-win agreement, consequences are not arbitrary punishments or rewards handed down from above. They are the natural results of performance. They generally fall into 4 categories. First, there are financial consequences, such as income or bonuses. Second are psychic consequences, which include recognition, respect, and credibility, often more motivating than money. Third are opportunity consequences, involving training, perks, or career advancement. Finally, there are responsibility consequences, which dictate whether an individual's scope of authority increases or decreases. When these are specified in advance, you eliminate the fear and politics that often plague performance reviews. However, even the best personal agreements will fail if the surrounding environment contradicts them. Win-slash-win cannot survive in a win-slash-lose system. If you talk about cooperation but your compensation structure rewards cutthroat competition, you are setting people up for failure. The author cites a real estate company that originally rewarded only the top 40 agents out of 800. This created a scarcity mentality where agents hoarded information and fought one another. When the company shifted its system to recognize everyone who met a specific sales volume, the internal competition vanished. Agents began sharing tips and helping each other close deals, and overall productivity skyrocketed. For win-win to thrive, systems, whether they are training, budgeting, or compensation, must support it. This brings us to the practical process of achieving these solutions. Drawing from the principles of negotiation, the author outlines a four-step process. First, see the problem from the other person's point of view. Second, identify the key issues and concerns, not just the positions. Third, determine what results would constitute a fully acceptable solution. And fourth, identify new options to achieve those results. Notice that the very first step requires you to step out of your own perspective. This is the bridge to the next major principle of effectiveness, Habit 5. Seek first to understand, then to be understood. Most of us struggle with this because we are trained to communicate, primarily to be understood. When we listen, we usually do so with the intent to reply, not to understand. We are busy preparing our counter-argument or filtering the other person's words through our own life experiences. The author compares this to an optometrist who hands a patient his own glasses and says, "Here, these work for me, try them." When the patient complains that everything is blurry, the optometrist blames the patient for not trying hard enough. We cannot prescribe solutions before we diagnose the problem, yet in communication, we do this constantly. To break this pattern, we must cultivate empathic listening. This is not merely active listening or mimicking what the other person says, which can feel manipulative. Empathic listening means listening with the intent to truly understand the other person's frame of reference, both intellectually and emotionally. It requires listening with your ears, your eyes, and your heart. When you do this, you give the other person psychological air. Just as you cannot focus on anything else if you are running out of oxygen, a person cannot focus on solutions or logic if their desperate need to be understood is not met. Once that vital need is met, you can begin to work on influence and problem solving. But achieving this level of understanding is rare because we often focus on the wrong data. Experts estimate that in face-to-face communication, only 10% of the message is contained in the words we speak. 30% comes from our sounds and intonation, and a massive 60% is body language. To get the truth, you cannot just listen with your ears. You must engage your eyes and your heart to sense the feeling and meaning behind the words. This brings us to a universal principle common to all true professionals: diagnose before you prescribe. An amateur salesperson sells products. A professional salesperson sells solutions to needs and problems. A lawyer must gather the facts before preparing a case. A doctor must diagnose the illness before writing a prescription. If a doctor prescribed medication for your child without asking a single question about the symptoms, you wouldn't trust that doctor. Yet, in our personal lives, we constantly prescribe before we diagnose. We swoop in with advice before we understand the pain. The biggest barrier to true listening is our tendency to respond autobiographically. Because we are so trapped in our own perspectives, we listen with the intent to reply, not to understand. We typically respond in one of four ways. We evaluate, agreeing or disagreeing. We probe, asking questions from our own frame of reference. We advise, giving counsel based on our own experience, or we interpret, trying to figure people out based on our own motives. Consider a father trying to talk to his son about school. The son expresses frustration, and the father immediately jumps in with, "I know just how you feel. I went through the same thing. You just need to try harder." The father means well, but he is filtering the son's reality through his own biography. He never uncovers the real issue. Perhaps the son is reading at a 4th grade level in high school because he is too busy dispensing logical advice. To break this cycle, we must move through the 4 stages of empathic listening. The first is mimicking content, which is just parroting words. The second is rephrasing content, which engages the logical brain. The third is reflecting feeling, which engages the emotional brain. But the 4th and most effective stage combines these. You rephrase the content and reflect the feeling. You give the person psychological air. You help them peel the layers of the onion until you reach the soft, vulnerable core where the real problem lies. Only after you have fully understood the other person can you move to the second half of Habit 5. Then to be understood. This requires courage. The ancient Greeks organized this sequence beautifully with 3 words: ethos, pathos, and logos. Ethos is your personal credibility and trust. Pathos is the empathetic side, the feeling. Logos is the logic or reasoning. Most people try to convince others using only logos, skipping the foundation of trust and empathy. But you cannot make a logical argument to a person who feels emotionally alienated. By focusing on your circle of influence, the part of the relationship you can control, you can always choose to understand first. It takes time initially, but like a good doctor making an accurate diagnosis, it saves massive amounts of time and pain in the long run, transforming transactions into deep, transformational connections. To practice this deep level of listening, you must set aside your own autobiography and resist the urge to project your own experiences onto others. You must listen not just with your ears but with your eyes and your heart, sensing emotions even when they are not verbalized. This is preventative maintenance for relationships. By dedicating one-on-one time to truly understand the perspectives of family members or employees, you build a reserve of trust. This investment yields open communication and prevents problems before they start. Ultimately, this deep mutual understanding opens the door to the highest activity in all of life. Habit 6. Synergize. Synergy is the culmination of all the previous habits. Simply put, it means that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. The relationship between the parts is itself a part, and it is the most catalytic, empowering, and unifying part. We see this in nature, where two plants growing close together improve the soil so that both grow better than they would alone. In human interactions, synergy is the essence of principle-centered leadership. It unifies and unleashes the greatest powers within people. Entering a synergistic interaction requires internal security and a spirit of adventure. You must be willing to leave the comfort zone of your known scripts and step into the unknown, trusting that the outcome will be better than anything you could have planned alone. It is a creative process. In a classroom or a business meeting, synergy begins with a safe environment where people feel understood. When trust is high, people stop defending their positions and start exploring new possibilities. They subordinate old ways of thinking to write a new script together. This is distinct from compromise. In a compromise, 1 + 1 = 1.5. Both sides give something up to get along. Synergy, however, is 1 + 1 = 3, 10, or 100. It produces a third alternative, a solution that is mutually beneficial and superior to what either party originally proposed. Consider a husband who wants to use his vacation for a fishing trip, while his wife wants to visit her ailing mother. A low-trust negotiation leads to a win-lose outcome or a resentful compromise where both feel shortchanged. But if they apply the principles of synergy, starting with a high emotional bank account and seeking first to understand, they can find a third alternative. Perhaps they find a camping spot near the mother, or arrange a visit at a different time that allows for both relaxation and family support. The result is not just a settled argument, but a strengthened relationship and a solution that satisfies both deeply. The prerequisite for this kind of creativity is valuing differences. Many people mistake uniformity for unity, trying to clone others to think exactly as they do. But if two people have the same opinion, one of them is unnecessary. The strength of a relationship lies in its diversity. Effective interdependence requires the humility to recognize that you see the world not as it is, but as you are. Your perspective is limited by your own conditioning. To transcend these limits, you must value the different psychological and emotional view of the other person. You need their perspective to see the whole picture. When you truly value differences, you stop trying to fix the other person and start saying, "Help me see what you see." This creates an environment of psychological air, where defensive barriers come down and the magic of synergy can begin. To illustrate the danger of ignoring these differences, consider the fable of the animal school. The animals decided to establish a standardized curriculum consisting of running, climbing, swimming, and flying. To make it easier to administer, all animals took all subjects. The duck was excellent at swimming, better than his instructor, in fact, but poor at running. Because he was slow, he had to stay after school and drop swimming to practice running. This continued until his webbed feet were badly worn and he was only average at swimming. But average was acceptable in school, so nobody worried about it, except the duck. The rabbit started at the top of the class in running, but had a nervous breakdown because of so much remedial work in swimming. The lesson is clear. When we fail to value individual differences and instead force uniformity, we destroy unique talent and effectiveness. Synergy is also the key to handling negative forces in our lives. In any situation where you want to create change, there are driving forces, usually logical, positive, and conscious, and restraining forces, which are often emotional, negative, and unconscious. Most people try to create change by increasing the driving forces. They push harder. But this is like pushing against a coiled spring. The harder you push, the harder it pushes back. Eventually, the spring snaps back and you return to the old equilibrium. Synergy allows you to work on the restraining forces instead. By creating an environment of safety and openness, you unfreeze those negative emotional barriers. You transform them into driving forces, creating a new, higher level of performance that lasts. This brings us to the final habit, which makes all the others possible. Habit 7. Sharpen the saw. Imagine coming upon a woodcutter feverishly sawing down a tree. You ask, "How long have you been at it?" He replies, "Over 5 hours. I'm exhausted." You suggest, "Why don't you take a break and sharpen that saw? You'd get it done much faster." But he snaps back, "I don't have time to sharpen the saw. I'm too busy sawing." Habit 7 is about taking time to sharpen the saw. It is the principle of balanced self-renewal. It preserves and enhances your greatest asset, yourself. This renewal must happen in 4 dimensions: physical, spiritual, mental, and social/emotional. The physical dimension involves caring effectively for your physical body, eating the right foods, getting sufficient rest and relaxation, and exercising on a regular basis. This is a classic Quadrant 2 activity, important but rarely urgent. Because it isn't urgent, we often neglect it until we face a health crisis. A good exercise program builds endurance, flexibility, and strength. It doesn't require hours a day. Just 30 minutes every other day can preserve your capacity to work, adapt, and enjoy life. The spiritual dimension is your core, your center, your commitment to your value system. It draws upon the sources that inspire and uplift you. For some, this is prayer or meditation. For others, it is immersion in great literature or music or communicating with nature. Consider the story of Arthur Gordon, who, feeling stale and empty, went to the beach with simple instructions to listen and reflect. By listening to the ocean and examining his motives, he rediscovered a fundamental truth. When your motives are wrong, nothing can be right. Spiritual renewal is a private victory, fought daily in the silent chambers of the soul. The mental dimension deals with our intellectual growth. For many, formal education is the end of learning. We let our minds atrophy, or we surrender them to the passive entertainment of television. Proactive mental renewal requires that we continue to read, write, and organize. Reading good literature expands our cultural awareness and paradigms. Writing, whether in a journal or through thoughtful letters, clarifies our thinking and improves our ability to be understood. By sharpening the mind, we ensure that we are not merely living out the scripts given to us by society, but are actively writing our own. Organizing and planning represent the second creation, the mental mapping of our path. But self-renewal is not complete without the fourth dimension, the social and emotional. While the physical, spiritual, and mental dimensions are primarily a private victory, requiring set-aside time, the social dimension is the public victory. It is renewed through our daily interactions with others, requiring us to practice the habits of interpersonal leadership, thinking win/win, seeking first to understand, and synergizing. Success in this public arena depends entirely on our sense of personal security. If our self-worth is derived solely from the social mirror, the shifting opinions and treatment of others, we will always feel threatened by disagreement or criticism. True intrinsic security comes from within. It springs from living a life of integrity, where our daily habits align with our deepest values. When we possess this internal peace, we can afford to be vulnerable, to listen with empathy, and to encourage others without feeling diminished. This internal security empowers us to become positive scriptwriters for the people around us. We hold a mirror up to our children, colleagues, and friends. If we reflect only their current behaviors or limitations, we reinforce those patterns. However, if we choose to see them in terms of their unseen potential, we help them grow. As Goethe wisely observed, Treat a man as he is, and he will remain as he is. Treat a man as he can and should be, and he will become as he can and should be. This principle of balanced renewal applies just as strictly to organizations. A healthy organization must attend to its economic health, the development of its talent, the quality of its human relations, and its integrity or purpose. Focusing exclusively on the bottom line while neglecting the people, or vice versa, creates internal conflict and eventual decline. Ultimately, renewal is the engine of the upward spiral of growth. We are not meant to stagnate or move in circles. By continuously educating our conscience and adhering to the law of the harvest, we move progressively higher. This requires a constant cycle of learning, committing, and doing. The author illustrates this power of self-determination through a personal experience during a sabbatical year in Hawaii. He and his wife, Sandra, committed to deep, open communication to explore the gap between stimulus and response. They established a crucial rule: no probing. They would only share when they felt ready, respecting each other's vulnerability. This safety allowed them to examine the scripts they had carried from their own upbringings. Even seemingly trivial irritations, like a recurring conflict over a household appliance, became gateways to understanding deep-seated emotional roots. By patiently listening and refusing to react defensively, they turned potential conflicts into synergistic insights, proving that when we nurture our relationships and ourselves, we gain the freedom to write a new future. In the case of the household appliance, the breakthrough came when the author realized Sandra's strong feelings were not about the object at all, but about her father. He had relied on that specific company during years of financial hardship, and her attachment to the brand was actually an expression of deep filial loyalty. Once they addressed this tender underlying emotion rather than the superficial logic of the purchase, the conflict vanished, replaced by a profound sense of unity. This illustrates a vital truth. Seemingly trivial disagreements often have roots in deep emotional experiences. By looking beyond the surface, we can heal not just the immediate issue, but the relationship itself. This kind of deep work allows us to become what the author calls a transition person. We all carry scripts handed down from previous generations, some beautiful, others harmful. A transition person is someone who identifies the unhealthy patterns, such as abuse or emotional neglect, and consciously chooses to stop them. Instead of passing these scripts on to their children, they rewrite the narrative. They provide their families with roots, offering a sense of identity, and wings, granting the freedom to fly separate from the past. This is the ultimate responsibility of intergenerational living, to act as a filter, preserving the good and discarding the bad, thereby changing the trajectory of the entire lineage. Such transformation requires an inside-out approach. We cannot improve our relationships or our lives by applying band-aids to external behaviors. As the statesman Anwar Sadat observed, real change requires altering the very, quote, fabric of our thought. It is a fundamental shift in paradigm that allows moral truth to become part of our being. This is not a quick fix, but a lifelong process of building character and integrity. It begins with the daily private victory, the consistent habit of conquering self before attempting to conquer worldly challenges. Ultimately, the author suggests that correct principles are not merely social conventions but natural laws, perhaps even divine in origin. He shares his personal conviction that aligning our lives with these principles connects us to a source of power greater than ourselves. When we educate our conscience and live by it, we fulfill our highest nature. As the philosopher Teilhard de Chardin famously noted, we are not human beings having a spiritual experience. We are spiritual beings having a human experience. Living a life of integrity, love, and service is a struggle, but it is the only struggle that yields lasting peace. As we persist in this effort, the task becomes easier, not because the nature of the task changes, but because our ability to perform it increases. The journey through the 7 habits is essentially a journey of return. It invites us to explore the depths of our own character and relationships, only to arrive back where we started, with a transformed perspective. As T.S. Eliot wrote, we must not cease from exploration, and the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we began and to know the place for the first time.
I hope you enjoyed this summary of the book. If you did, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It really helps a lot. And if the summary caught your interest, you can find a link in the description to buy the full book and dive deeper into its ideas. I'd also love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Did you like this format? What would you change or improve for future summaries? See you in the next video.